Today, we're tackling one of the most exciting challenges in tech, deploying a secure, scalable, and structured platform for managing cloud resources. I know it sounds a bit overwhelming, but don't worry. By the end of this video, you'll learn how to deploy your very own Azure optimized cloud infrastructure quickly and easily. Let's get started. Now, the Azure Landing Zone process looks like this conceptually. First, you'll need a GitHub Enterprise account, whether it is Enterprise Cloud, EMU, or server, doesn't matter. You may need an app registration, which is used if you're deploying the landing zones with a service principal in your Entra ID tenant. You will also need a personal access token configured with permissions specified in your GitHub Enterprise account, and it will require the all repository admin permissions in your GitHub organization so that a couple of repositories can be created automatically. You will also need to install or update PowerShell if you already have it, which is PowerShell version 7 or PowerShell Core, as well as the Azure Cloud Shell or the Azure CLI. And you will need to run the command az login to authenticate to Azure. You will also need 3 new empty subscriptions in your Azure tenant to be placed in the respective management groups, which will be part of your landing zones hierarchy. These management groups include management, identity, and connectivity. Next, you'll need to select a Bootstrap subscription, which should be outside the scope of your landing zone subscriptions. You will also need to assign tenant permissions to either the currently logged in user if you're the one performing the Bootstrap and the landing zones configuration, or if you have a service principal configured to run it for you. In either case, you will need to assign the user access administrator permissions and the properties of your Entra ID tenant. You also need to install or update your PowerShell modules. There are 2 modules that you will require. One is the AZ module. You will also need the ALZ module, which will contain the Bootstrap commandlet. And part of the Bootstrap operation includes configuring an input file for parameters for the Bootstrap command. Then you run the Bootstrap command. And when you run the Bootstrap command, these are some of the resources that will be configured in Azure. It will contain a resource group and managed identities. Each managed identity will perform part of the operation. One will be the plant operation for provisioning the landing zones, and the other is the apply operation. You will also have, if you select from the input file, to provision self-hosted runners in Azure. These will manifest as Azure container instances. So you will have 2 Azure container instances, which are created by pulling an image from the Azure Container Registry, and it will be secured inside of a virtual network, specifically within that virtual network inside of a subnet. And there will be a DNS private zone configured also to ensure that you only have private access. You will also provision a storage account and a container with the state file. The Bootstrap operation will also deploy these repositories in your GitHub organization that will contain the Terraform IAC code and the respective GitHub action workflows that will perform the deployment of the landing zones. And when those landing zones are deployed using Terraform, it will be deployed first in the plan phase with the Terraform init and Terraform plan operations, and then it will go into the next phase, but the next phase has to be approved, which is the apply phase. So the Bootstrap operation will also create a new GitHub organization team and add the members that you specify from the input file into that team so that that team and its members can approve or reject the plan to go to the next phase, which is the apply phase, so that the GitHub Action workflow can then deploy the resources to Azure. These are the landing zone resources, and it will look like this with the tenant and the tenant root group beneath. It will actually start by deploying the organization intermediate root management group and the platform and landing zones management groups as well. The platform management group will hold the identity management and connectivity management group and subscriptions to represent the cloud infrastructure components, while the landing zones management group will contain core, online, sandbox, and the decommissioned management groups that represents more of the application landing zones. That's what the deployment process looks like. Now I'm going to demonstrate the Bootstrap operation, which starts off by first creating a top level folder called Accelerator. So if we look at my current working directory under C drive, I've created a folder called Accelerator, and beneath Accelerator, I have these two subfolders, which is config and output. So config will contain your input file, and the input file is what we're showing in the editor at the top, where we have the values for the parameters that will be used for the Bootstrap commandlet, like the IAC type is Terraform, and the Bootstrap module name is ALZ GitHub because it's going to configure some properties of your GitHub Enterprise account. It will be deploying the complete baseline Azure Landing Zone module. So that's what the starter module name represents. There are also some other key value pairs in this input file that will be used for the Bootstrap deployment. Some of it is sensitive, like the personal access token for the GitHub system or the GitHub Enterprise account, as well as the personal access token if you decide to use the Azure container instances in Azure that will be provisioned as GitHub hosted runners. So I won't scroll down to show any of those properties. Instead, I'm just going to go right into the deployment of the Bootstrap. The deploy accelerator commandlet is provided by the ALZ module, and the type of deployment, again, that we're doing is Terraform. We specify the input path to this file that contains all of the properties we want to use for running the Bootstrap commandlet, and we also are referencing the output folder that will be used as part of the initial Bootstrap deployment, And I'm just adding a verbose switch so we can see output. So as you can see down below in the terminal, the Bootstrap has completed successfully. So we are going to next look at how the GitHub Enterprise account was configured with some of those properties. So in the ALZ management repository that was created, we have a set of GitHub action workflows that we can use for the deployment. Specifically, we're going to select this one, which is the Azure Landing Zones continuous delivery. We're just going to run the workflow in this case using the workflow dispatch, which is a manual trigger. So if I select run workflow from the main branch, it's only one branch right now, and I'm going to click on run workflow, and that should trigger the workflow. So if I click on Azure Landing Zones continuous delivery, you'll see that these steps have already started. And if I click into it again for more details, we see that the code has checked out, Terraform is installed, and the init operation is complete. And now it's going through the apply operation. This part, the plan phase of the deployment, takes about 1 minute. and the apply phase takes much longer, which is really about 2.5 hours. So we'll definitely pause the video while that part runs, and then we'll come back later and look at the results. So this is the plan that is being suggested. If I come back up to the workflow view, we see that this is now complete after about 1 minute, and it's prompting us to proceed with the apply phase by providing an approval. If I go to review deployments on the right, I can select this checkbox, approve and deploy, and now it starts this other phase that is going to perform the deployment. The deployment that will be performed is going to be in Azure. We should see that some Bootstrap resources have already been deployed and configured. If we look at these resource groups, for example, this resource group that is labeled agents will contain the Azure container instances that were built from images inside of this Azure container registry using the user assigned managed identities. Also in the other resource groups that were created. So all of these resource groups, RG, ALZ, MGMT, these three were all created with the Bootstrap to accommodate the subsequent deployment of the landing zones in Azure. And this is Azure that we're looking at in that first subscription. If I look at the other management group, we see also that there are a couple of user-assigned managed identities that will be used for both the plan and the apply phase of the landing zone deployment operation. And one more time, if we go back to our resource groups and look at that last one, this resource group will contain the state file for the Terraform deployment. So at this point, I'll pause the video, and once the deployment of the landing zones is complete, we'll come back and check to make sure that it was deployed properly. After the landing zone deployment is complete, this is what it looks like from the top. At the tenant root group, we have a hierarchy of the landing zones. And if I expand, you'll see we have all of the respective management groups beneath the top level organization intermediate root, ES, including decommissioned landing zones. If I expand landing zones, I have the sub management groups beneath corp and online. Under platform, I have the connectivity, identity, and management groups with the respective subscriptions placed automatically inside. So this is what you should expect, of course, inside of each of these subscriptions, like the connectivity subscription, for example. If I go to the resource groups, you'll see that the connectivity resources have been deployed as an example. So this is a good check, and I can continue on to also take a quick look at the management resources under the RG-management resource group, and we see that these resources have also been deployed as part of the landing zone provisioning process. In this video, we cover the process of deploying the landing zones, demonstrated the bootstrap and the deployment operations, and verified that the landing zones was indeed deployed. Now, I know this may still seem like a lot of information, and you're right, but don't worry, there's also an official guide available at the following link. I've also posted this link in the description of this video, and that link is https aka ALZ Accelerator docs. And if I do this one more time, you'll get it, I'm sure, aka ALZ Accelerator docs. And as you can see, it's very extensive. There is a lot of hyperlinks on the right with the index to the various sections, and we have diagrams, very comprehensive, detailed guide on the process, step-by-step instructions to perform this deployment. All right, let me know what you think in the comments, and if you enjoyed this, make sure to like and subscribe for more updates. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.